You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in the veterinary space every week. Ivan, why don't you go ahead and introduce today's guest?
Hi, my name is Ivan Zach, and I'm happy to introduce Steven Eidelman today. And we're going to talk about modernizing veterinary clinic or care. And so Steven is a founder and CEO of Modern Animal, and he's a former entrepreneur in residence for digital health at Mars, and formerly co-founder and chief operating officer of Whistle Labs, which was acquired by Mars. He carries a degree of Bachelor of Arts in Political Sciences, summa cum laude, from University of Pennsylvania. He loves to travel a few interesting places, including Kenya, Uganda, and Bolivia. So, Steve, with what you're starting right now, I bet your favorite destinations are going to be trade shows going forward. Can you tell us what Modern Animal is about, and how is it different from everything else that's been happening?
Hey guys, well, yeah, thank you for having me on. So Modern Animal is revolutionizing the very long sort of existing model of veterinary care that's been around for a very long time and trying to recreate it from the ground up with technology and design at the very center of kind of everything that we do. So we are building clinics, we're building our own technology, our own applications for our staff and our clients to really prioritize convenience for our clients, a much better place for people to work, and ultimately long-term to really change the way care is delivered by driving efficiencies into the model and lowering the cost of care. So we're opening our first clinic in Los Angeles in February of next year, and we'll hopefully grow very quickly from there across LA and beyond across the country from there.
So what is the uniqueness? I mean, there's quite a few things that you mentioned there. And the one thing that I heard is that there is an application for the actual owner that is coming from you guys. So what is that going to drive? Is that going to drive visits to the hospital or some information source for the clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of nuance in if you start to talk about, as I'm sure you guys do all the time on this show, the challenges that maybe a client faces interacting with the clinic or that a practitioner might face working in a clinic. There's really no silver bullet to fix veterinary medicine. And in many ways, veterinary medicine is not broken. We have a lot of amazing doctors delivering phenomenal care. It just hasn't evolved. The system of how people interact with the clinic and access the clinic and how people work in the clinic hasn't really changed or evolved much. And so the opportunity that we saw was the technology has obviously changed a lot of industries in a very much a wholesale manner. And so if you could rewrite the playbook, what would you do differently? And it turns out there's quite a few pages to the book. So there's a lot of things that we would like to change. You asked about the mobile app. The mobile app for us is really just an interface for the client to have better access to the practice. You asked, is it to drive visits into the clinic? I would say it's actually both to drive visits in and to drive visits out. It's about getting people to come in when they need to come in and to not have to come in when they don't need to. It's about getting more information more easily, and ultimately creating transparency for the client around what they're paying for and having more access to ask questions, not having to worry that their doctor's out on Wednesdays and Thursdays and does surgeries on Fridays and then is on vacation next week. Having seamless access to Modern Animal and all of our staff 24/7 through our virtual care and in the clinic or once we have our network of clinics to a range of clinics, and all delivering the same standard of care with seamless flow of information between all of those locations. And all of that I just said isn't something terribly groundbreaking in the world. It just hasn't happened in our little corner of the universe within veterinary medicine. And I think it's time.
So Steve, with all of this kind of rewriting the playbook of veterinary medicine, it sounds to some degree like what you're doing. Do you think that this is going to be incredibly disruptive in this market that's saturated? There's a lot of players in. Do you think that the approach, the technology, the systems, do you think that they will be disruptive in this market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you have to ask yourself what defines disruption. It's a very popular word these days. In many ways, we don't really want to disrupt the industry. I think we we want to highlight that there are a lot of great doctors practicing great medicine. We just want to get all the other stuff out of their way. And, ultimately, if we're successful and we build the vision that we have set out, I think it will be disruptive in that it will completely change what the standard of the experience is for going to a veterinary clinic and working in a veterinary clinic. But we're not trying to disrupt veterinary medicine in the sense that it already exists in a very good form in terms of the actual care. It's just the systems around it have not evolved. And a lot of amazing entrepreneurs and technologists have built good pieces of software that have helped push the ball forward. I think what's disruptive about how we're thinking about it is that we've realized that to do everything that we all talk about a lot in this industry, you have to go deeper. You have to start earlier. You can't just fix it with software in an existing clinical setting. And so for us, that means changing every interaction point, changing the workflow, changing the way that the clinic's actually laid out. Even that last point, that's not something that most clinics have the luxury or opportunity to pursue. We're in a phase of, obviously, as you say, saturation. There's obviously a lot of clinics out there. There's a lot of consolidation happening. But the market keeps growing, and that's why there is so much consolidation. A lot of private equity firms and other sources of capital are very interested in entering the market, but they're not able to address all of the things that we see as problems because they're taking existing clinics and collecting them and trying to drive efficiencies from the back end. Oftentimes they don't change the logo, they don't change the name on the door, they don't change the software, they don't change the experience. And that's a very difficult place to really innovate from. Not impossible, but it's difficult.
Interesting. And then aside from the information flow and other qualities that you just described, you're also approaching this new model that I'm seeing more and more erupted, the business model of veterinary medicine, not in sort of transactional, but also based on the, I don't know what's the best word for it, the membership medicine or subscription model. Mars, as that has the wellness plans. So what is the modern animal model, and how is this different from other models of that kind?
Yeah, so our vision at Modern Animal is to build great relationships with our clients and facilitate that communication and continue to break down any barriers to accessing that relationship. And so for us, membership is really a tool to, one, find clients who are proactive and want to opt into what we're doing and believe in what we're doing. And so it's not for everybody, but we tried to make it as low of a price point such that it's not a barrier. We want to create easier access to care for everybody. So the $100 a year membership that we have is really meant to give you full access to what we offer as a clinic and as a service. So that means with membership, you get 24/7 access to our medical team digitally. You have unlimited exams. What we saw in the industry was that exam fees are sometimes a burden. Getting a hold of the doctor to figure out if you need to go in or not is a burden. Those are things that ultimately we want you to feel like if there's any issue, any moment of anxiety or concern that you have about whether you should come in, what might be going on, should you be concerned, we want you to reach out to us. And we don't want there to be any friction between that moment of you questioning what's happening and maybe feeling anxiety and ultimately getting someone knowledgeable to answer your question without having to wait for them to call you back, without having to have them tell you that they don't have access to your medical records, so they don't really know, without having DCPR, so they actually legally can't even provide care. So we want to break those barriers down and make it as easy as possible for you to come to us. That said, we also want to help you make an informed decision about whether you need to take time to come in. So the example of 3 a.m, your pet's throwing up. Do you need to rush to the ER, wait multiple hours in the emergency room, pay a huge fee because it's emergency medicine, and then ultimately find out that it was not that severe? You could have given them some chicken and rice, and then see how it progressed. We want you to feel like you have access to a practitioner at that moment in time. We just don't want you to have to waste your time and money if you don't need to. And so, how can we be as easy, if not easier, to get to the answer than the internet, but also be cheaper and more accessible than the model today of going into the clinic? So that's really the goal of membership. And how is it different? I'd say there's a lot of different approaches right now that people are talking about. I would say fundamentally the difference between what we're doing and the traditional more wellness plan model is we're not trying to bundle a bunch of services and discount them into a payment plan. We think that that's a financing problem, and that's a very important problem for the industry to solve. And we think there's a lot of great companies working on that, such as ScratchPay. There's others outside of the veterinary industry that make credit available. But that's a payment problem, and we also are big fans of insurance. We think that educating clients about insurance is important. But we want to be very good at delivering care, and we want to be as easy to access to get that care.
It's very innovative. Speaking about innovation, we had a guest on the podcast here, and he's sort of by affiliation from Mars, is a former colleague of yours. And we asked him a question about innovation in the large enterprise. And, seeing you here right now, building something new after being the entrepreneur in residence at Mars, which is, highly respected and large organization, and probably was an interesting experience for you. But it seems like your path is similar to my choice, is to leave the large organization and to create something new on your own. So what's your experience with the innovation in large organization, and whether it is possible or not, if you think? And then how do you feel about getting through the experience of being acquired and then learning from large organizations for your next best thing?
Yeah, I think I know who you're referring to, and I have a lot of respect for him. And I think, in many ways, we see the world in a very similar way. And, first off, I'd say, Mars is an incredible company. I was very fortunate to get to work closely with a bunch of the teams there across different parts of the business. Innovating within a very large organization is probably not my greatest strength. And so, as you said, I think part of this is just recognizing the environment that I find I can operate best within. But I also think that innovation in a larger enterprise is very much possible. It's just probably a different definition and a different approach. Large organizations obviously have much more significant businesses than startups that have no business yet. They have a lot of stakeholders. There's obviously the inevitable politics, but with that comes a lot of opportunity, right? If a large company of any meaningful scale, moves the needle a little bit, it actually ultimately can have a very significant impact on customers, on, in our industry, on obviously practitioners, and oftentimes it does have a very significant impact. I think our goal at Modern Animal is to set the ambition, kind of in an unbounded way, where we don't really stop until we've achieved the full vision of what we are hoping to accomplish. And by doing that, we set a different standard. In many ways, our goal is to do this for the industry at large. If you look at the largest veterinary companies in the industry, maybe they've gotten to 1,000 clinics. There's 28,000 clinics in the United States alone, right? And so how can we have the biggest impact in the industry is oftentimes not going to be what can we accomplish ourselves, but what can we inspire others to do. And I think that large corporations have a responsibility to do that. I think that startups have a responsibility to do that as well. And we hope that along the way, we can build a great company while also, empowering those large enterprises in our industry to continue to innovate as well. This is not a winner-take-all type of market. That might be the case and is often the case in other industries. But in our industry, empowering doctors and empowering pet owners is really something that a lot of us have to be doing together in order to see the change we all envision.
That's pretty cool. Steve, it's interesting to have the three of us on the call today. We're all now multi-time founders, all have started at least two companies. And sometimes, the journey to entrepreneurship seems like a little bit of a crazy one. It seems like a disease to some degree. I say to some people, some of my friends. And, you obviously don't need to be doing this. There's all kinds of other beaches that you could be on after your exit to Mars. And I kind of wanted to dig in and say, why are you doing this? What inspired you to kind of come at this problem? And just get a little deeper as to, how you got here, how you got to be the CEO of Modern Animal.
Well, I did move to the beach. I moved back to LA and live very close to the beach. But it's a great question. I think it is somewhat of a disease, as you said. There's nothing that I have done in my life that's more fun than building a company. And I think part of it is, I love working with people. And what greater way to sort of do it than build your own company and get to pick everybody that you work with. So I'm fortunate to get to build a team and work with that team every day. And it's a different experience than joining a company, especially a larger one where maybe you've got the good and the bad, and hopefully you're able to choose, where you go, obviously, and who you work with. But that's one of the greatest gifts, I think. After selling Whistle, I very much expected myself to leave the industry. I've always been a generalist. I was an investor previously. I was a management consultant. Even in college, I had a hard time selecting a major because I loved the diversity of learning across a bunch of different areas. After building my first company, I realized when I looked around at every other potential opportunity, whether it was hanging out on a beach or building a company in a different space, I realized that one, it's really interesting to get to dive back into something you already know. And no matter how confident you are that you know it, you know that there's a lot more to learn. And so I think for me, it was a decision around building on what I already had started to learn and getting deeper. And I think the first time, I don't know your guys' experience, but starting my first company, there wasn't a great deal of insight that I was able to derive before I started it. It was a desire to be an entrepreneur, a space that I was excited about and interested in and had an emotional connection to. But beyond that, I saw the opportunity at a very rudimentary and very high level. And I think this time around, when I was considering other opportunities, the one that I felt like I had the greatest level of insight into was the industry that I had already been in. And obviously Whistle was not necessarily a veterinary company directly, but we were trying very hard to sell our device and partner with the veterinary profession as a way to obtain more data and to distribute the product. And ultimately, that data hopefully feeding back into animal health was always our vision. But by getting deeper into the industry and sort of doubling down on it, there were a few things that happened. One was, I realized just how passionate I was about the industry and the problems that I kind of had a deeper appreciation for. I also just had fallen in love with the people in the industry, whether it was, the entrepreneurs who I'd met along the way, executives at some of the larger companies, or just, the doctors themselves, having spent time at a number of different clinics, shadowing and understanding the problems, to just, you joked about trade shows, a lot of time at trade shows and talking to people who've been in this industry for decades. And I felt in the end a real responsibility to as I said, double down, stay in the space, and ultimately build what I had been learning about and make it real. And that's ultimately, what led to Modern Animal. And excited to be, we're only a year in, but feels like this is what I'd like to be doing for the rest of my career.
That's awesome. There's so many things that I thought about when you were talking about, because I do come from the veterinary industry, but I think I've been shy to tell myself something that in the last company I worked in, and at IDEX, actually, it was my former COO that said that. He said a thing that I was shocked. He said, "Look, I do like animals, of course I do, but it's not the passion why I'm in this profession." And he said that I love people that work in this industry, and I want to improve it for them. And that sort of became my passion as well. It's I've been a veterinarian, and I find it's a really hard job. Everybody you meet, every time you say you're a veterinarian, everybody's like, "Oh, I wanted to be a vet," when I was a kid. And then I always want to tell them, don't. It's really hard. After a certain time, you burn out. People, get into suicide, and it's just like, it's hard. And then I'm passionate these days more about helping the veterinarians and veterinary teams to do their job in the love of animals. So that's, I kind of with you on improving the industry altogether, not just helping animals as it is. So how big do you want to grow? What do you think? Like, you're building a hospital, you're building a network. Is it going to be bigger than Mars? Is it going to be, what is your sort of area where you go in? Is this just big cities, or what is the plan?
I mean, we'd like to build the largest company that we can, but while building it responsibly and not compromising on our mission and our core values. If I could grow it to be as big as Mars, that would be quite the accomplishment. Mars, is a 100-year-old company and has been built by some incredible entrepreneurs and a long lineage of entrepreneurs, and now run by very talented executives. And they continue to expand into new markets and continue to grow quickly. So that's a tough one to catch up to. But, ultimately the goal is to build the best clinic, demonstrate, just how different it can be. And from there to scale as quickly as we can, while, building a team internally at HQ that can support the growth that we need, and ultimately finding incredible practitioners to join us in clinics. And at some point there will be, I think that the rate of growth will be hampered by sort of the resources we can get, whether it's capital or talent. I think that said, there's also the opportunity of, at some point in our evolution, we would like to find a way to take what we're building and share it with the rest of the industry. And I don't know exactly what that will look like, but ultimately, as I said earlier in the call, if all we do is build clinics, I think that's a great company and it's very much worth building. But I think the opportunity is larger, and we'd like to have a bigger impact than what we will likely be able to accomplish with only those clinics that we open ourselves. So yeah, I would love to see 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, whatever it takes, the entire industry to be rewritten. And it doesn't have to be along the lines of our playbook, but at least directionally, we have a lot of conviction that there are a few things that we hold true that are inevitabilities at this point. I mean, there's days I feel like I wake up and I know this business already exists, and we're just trying to catch up to it, to that vision almost in a different time zone. This is going to happen. We are going to see practices that prioritize both customer experience and their staff experience, and that ultimately are more profitable and generate more revenue as a result of that. You know, I will go into clinics, and oftentimes the first thing I hear from the front desk person is either please hold, I'm on the phone, basically, or what do you need? Very different than when I check into a hotel. And yet when I check into a hotel, I don't have any sort of emotional baggage I'm showing up with, or anxiety or fear, or even just overjoyed happiness. You know, I think that the interesting thing about our industry is the amount of emotionality that exists from a consumer perspective, and then just how incredible the people are who work in the industry. And I think, you were hitting on that when you were referencing, a colleague of yours who talked about the people in the industry. If you look at a lot of our messaging and our branding, it's very early, but what you'll see us lean into a lot is it's not really about the animal. I think that we believe that innately this profession comes with a lot of goodness, in the sense that people go into it only to take care of animals. There's no other reason why people become veterinarians. And so if we already know that to be true, how can we support people in that? And then all of a sudden you find yourself solving a people problem, not an animal problem. And so we are committed to solving the human experience in animal medicine. And that means the experience for clients who are coming in anxious and afraid and uncertain. And it's the experience of being a human being working in a veterinary clinic. And that's what we're committed to. And anything that we can do to further that is ultimately our goal.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinaryinnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.